So, what are the United States up to again? The United States of America is considering reducing military operations in the Middle East, says Trump. No wonder, since Chuck Norris died and now they're probably about 50% weaker. In any case, after this cynical joke, today we'll be talking about how Vladimir Putin longs for NATO to go to war against Iran. What a huge mistake this balancing act by Trump is, who is basically starting to say something like, well, we actually defeated Iran there, we messed up Hormuz, and now someone else should go solve it, and if you need help, you can ask, but solve it yourselves, we're sailing away. A huge mistake, a huge strategic mistake, and we'll talk about why. And of course, we'll also talk about how Europe is starting to approach democracy, Donald Trump, and his Hormuz initiative. Because what we talked about here recently, namely that Europe shouldn't refuse help from Donald Trump, but should say that it wants something in return, is starting to come true. On the other hand, it's still something that suits Russia, that suits Vladimir Putin, and we'll discuss it. So if you want to know more, keep watching and we'll get started. One of the reasons why this suits Russia so terribly well is that, of course, oil prices are massively high and they're making a lot of money because of it, and they're able to patch up their budget, which was quite solidly in the red because of this. But another reason why this suits Russia is the propaganda aspect of it. Because right now, after all, NATO and the United States are attacking Iran, pushing their own geopolitical interests. And that means Russia is completely off the hook when it attacks Ukraine. Of course, the situation is not exactly the same because neither NATO nor the United States nor anyone else has occupied any Iranian territory or claimed it so far. On the other hand, it is clearly a violation of the sovereignty of a state, and Russian propaganda can portray it as something similar to what they are doing in Ukraine. It's not that the West and NATO haven't given the Russians plenty of resources in the past, but the West has been trying to communicate now in a way that says, well, Iraq, Yugoslavia, all of that, it was either under the United Nations banner or it was a mistake and we've learned from it, right? And this kind of communication, saying it was under the United Nations banner, a mistake, and we've learned from it, was quite a strong argument against the Russians. However, right now, at this moment, it's not even under the United Nations banner, and what's happening here is just as stupid and foolish as, for example, the fake chemical weapons in Iraq. That means Russian propaganda must be having a field day right now, because we've basically proven them right to a large extent, and all they have to do is twist it a bit, embellish it, and build on it, and they've won. So that's another point that makes this very profitable for the Russians. They're getting rich off oil, and their propaganda is winning. And for that reason, Putin might feel rather conflicted if he read that Europeans are starting to consider sending some ships to Hormuz, that there isn't as much disunity as it might have seemed at first when everyone refused, but at the same time, there isn't complete obedience and servility to the United States either, that we would just go there, prolong the conflict, which will end up being resolved diplomatically anyway, and not want anything in return. At this moment, the approach we talked about at the beginning is actually quite popular in Europe, namely that yes, we could send some ships, we could show some initiative, we could provide some support to the United States, but what's in it for us, right? Yes, transactional politics, transactional negotiations, just tell them, all right, Donald, you need our ships in Hormuz, you're weak, you can't keep things under control there, fine, we'll send our ships, but you tell us how you want to end the war, how you want to negotiate with Iran, how we'll bring down energy prices in Europe, just tell us what the plan is, and besides that, of course, you'll help us in Ukraine, you'll be more involved in protecting Europe, and so on and so on and so on. Simply put, something for something, a deal, we help in Hormuz, they help Ukraine more. This transactional policy is also good because if we have our ships there, if we have some military presence there, we'll be able to have a much bigger say in how the whole situation will be resolved. Of course, no firepower, as we've already said, can stop Iran or reopen Hormuz, but that's not the point right now. It's about showing some will to the United States. We have to stay involved. We have to cooperate in some way. But we can't show complete servility so that we can have a better say in how the whole conflict will eventually be ended, resolved, how the negotiations will go, and so on and so on and so on. And overall, it can help us gain greater influence in the Middle East. Really, the participation of those ships, the participation of those countries should give them, let's say, a ticket to the negotiating table when it comes time to resolve things with Iran diplomatically. I still maintain that there is no military solution to this and that, in the end, it will have to be resolved diplomatically. And of course, that diplomatic solution will be brutally painful for the United States because they have not been able to convincingly push Iran to the corner. And now, basically, with what the United States is saying here, they are considering a retreat, which, doesn't really give them the greatest strength to set conditions. In any case, if we are there, it's not that we should be dictating the terms, but at least we will be influencing what will happen, what will be negotiated, what kind of agreement there will be about some of those transports, whether Iran will charge for Hormuz or not, whether they will attack our ships or not. Simply put, we'll be able to be there. We'll be able to be at the table. And that's what's important here. Of course, it's also important that theoretically the United States could get more involved in the Ukrainian conflict thanks to this transaction. That would also be positive for us and negative for Russia. However, so far, all in all, it seems that Russia really wants NATO to be more or less subservient to Donald Trump, not to set any real conditions, to be scared, and to prolong the conflict. That is its main interest. And for that reason, also for that reason, at the moment when people started talking about the possibility that NATO allies might not go along with the Americans or that the alliance could somehow fall out, the Americans received an amazing gift from the Russians. A kind of reminder, hey, Russia exists. Hey, Russian fighter jets are flying. Simply put, Russia started its strongest hybrid operations, propaganda campaigns, and all these threatening operations at the moment when it was being decided whether we would send the boats or not, whether we would listen to Trump or not. And so Russia started making threats. Hey, the Narva People's Republic in Estonia. Hey, there's a drought over Estonia. Russia is here and Russia might be getting ready to do something. You'd better listen to Trump. So through these threats, through these manipulations, Putin was trying to maneuver NATO into a situation where they'd just follow Trump like puppies and wouldn't set any conditions, where the conflict would just be artificially prolonged without us having any say in it because we'd be paralyzed by fear of Russia, and for that reason we'd go along with the United States without any objections at all. Fortunately, that didn't happen. At least it hasn't happened yet. So far, we're still at a pretty good level of transactional politics where it's something for something, where we show some of our own will, but we're not completely servile, and that's a relatively good path. Of course, the situation is still completely shitty. Iran still holds the key cards, it still can't be solved militarily, and there still isn't any positive solution, Because what the United States is considering right now also isn't a positive solution. I did say that we actually need to end this conflict as quickly as possible, but we need to end it in a way that lets us save at least a bit of face. And it seems that the United States doesn't want to save face here because they're saying, we've achieved everything we need, now we're going to leave, we're ending, or maybe we'll be ending our operations, and the mess, let those who need it take care of it. Actually, we don't care anymore, basically goodbye. In a way, they're clearing the field, saying they won't deal with it any further, so the solution is up to us and the Chinese and the Asians. So does that mean the United States is withdrawing from the Iran negotiations, or what exactly is the situation right now? Because if they're saying right now that those who have something to do with Hormuz should deal with it, then they're effectively saying that Europeans and Asians will now have to negotiate with Iran about whether their ships will be allowed to sail or not. and we won't deal with it. All right, but at that point, the United States is leaving completely humiliated because they didn't get their way. Iran still exists. Its regime is still holding on. Its allies, or rather American allies, in the region are taking a beating. Allies in Europe are being hurt by oil prices, of course. Allies in Asia are being hurt by oil prices, and even enemies in Asia, sure. But if the United States intends to just leave, just take the ball and go home, then they're abandoning the negotiating table and leaving it to us. And so now it's up to us to negotiate with Iran however we need to. Fine, we'll do it. We'll make our own deal with Iran as we need to. But that means a complete degradation of United States interests in the Middle East. That's an unbelievable strategic mistake on the part of the United States. But on the other hand, we talked about this at the beginning, that the United States would eventually end up rather humiliated and that their influence in the Middle East is, in a way, declining, right? So the question here would be whether I should choose to condemn the United States for prolonging the war or condemn them for wanting to leave the war now. But I think I'll condemn them for both, because just as prolonging the war is stupid, ending it by simply leaving and leaving it to others is also completely stupid. The way it probably should have been done now is that the United States would stay there, take the Europeans who are willing to work on it in some way, take the Asians who are willing to work on it, and push for a diplomatic solution, some kind of agreement with Iran. And they would say, okay, we won't overthrow the Iranian regime, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want here. We're still here. Our influence is still here. Let's make some kind of agreement. Tell me what you need. Tell me what your conditions are. We'll negotiate. This should be some kind of way they'll deal with it. No, we'll keep shooting until Iran surrenders completely, or on the other hand, we won't shoot anymore. We're out of here. Deal with it yourselves. These are just extremes, and both of these things are complete crap. And that's exactly what Donald Trump has tried in the last month. On one hand, it's surrender Iran or I won't deal with you. And now it's like, I'm probably leaving, deal with it yourselves. It's absolute lack of strategy. And I feel a bit hypocritical when I criticize Donald Trump for wanting to leave after I told him he should leave. But I'm not criticizing him for wanting to leave. I'm criticizing him for the way he's considering leaving. Because that's not the kind of departure he should make, right? This is a departure that will obviously weaken the United States even more than if they just had to make some kind of deal with Iran. Because not only will they end up humiliated, they'll also end up as a bunch of idiots who just messed up the whole region and then left, instead of continuing to delegate their influence. So they'll end up weak, ridiculed, defeated, and it'll also turn out that they're actually not needed, because the people affected by America's weakening, America's humiliation, and of course the messed up situation will solve this themselves. Perfect job by Donald Trump. So that's also something that suits Putin, you know. That's also something that suits Putin because the Americans are weakening themselves by doing this. This war here is a showcase of the incompetence of American politicians. The soldiers did everything right. The politicians screwed it up brilliantly again. Donald Trump started this war at the worst possible moment, at the worst possible time, with the worst possible preparation imaginable. And of course, he intends to end it in the worst possible way, by simply walking away. But by simply walking away, he won't achieve the end of the war. All he'll achieve is that he'll stop sitting at the table, that Iran will start making bilateral agreements with everyone and say, we'll let this one through, we won't let that one through, what will you give us for it, and so on. So overall, Iran will be able to gain influence through Hormuz if it's dealt with without the United States. And effectively, this led to the United States militarily smashing Iran, but strengthening Russia. And now, after their hasty, botched withdrawal, which was done in the worst possible way because it was without any agreement with Iran, they're giving Iran free rein and saying, settle it however you want. If this isn't total strategic incompetence, where you throw away all the work of your army, then what is? What could be a greater example of absolute political ineptitude than this? The United States is, of course, destined to weaken in the Middle East because after the mess they've made there, their allies are starting to wonder, damn, was it even worth it for us to have these bases here? But if the United States leaves this war like, I'm taking my ball, screw you guys, I'm going home, then that's like a signature, that's a verdict, that's a stamp saying the United States are complete idiots, and there's really no point in counting on them in the Middle East in any way. Vladimir Putin is sitting in Moscow and laughing so loudly that they have to install new noise barriers so he doesn't disturb Red Square. Damn, it's unbelievable what's happening here in this hemisphere, man. Unbelievable. You just have to hope here that Donald Trump will change his mind again, or that we'll somehow persuade him. And that in the end, the solution will be that the Americans and Europeans will put some pressure on Iran by having a military presence in Hormuz, but at the same time, they will negotiate diplomatically with Iran to end this war, and we'll start talking somehow. If we want to lower oil prices, which is our main concern, otherwise it won't work. There are actually hundreds and hundreds of tankers there. We don't have a navy big enough to protect them, so it just has to be negotiated somehow. Or what? Or what if it doesn't get negotiated? And we'll be sitting here like complete idiots, just watching as one country after another makes a deal with Iran, letting their tankers through, while we're just sitting here like total fools, watching everyone else take oil from Iran and Kuwait, only we won't. That's not really okay, is it? That's not really okay. And again, it strengthens Iran's position when we give them the opportunity to have a say in politics and to speak with a very strong voice in the politics of other countries. Because until now, when there wasn't a war, of course, any such attempt to blackmail all the other countries through Hormuz would have been pure, straightforward, Iran is bad. Now that the war is underway, Iran says, we don't want to let everyone through since the United States is attacking, but let's make a deal. What can you offer or promise us? Right? And Iran can effectively gain enormous influence this way. If we don't end this war, so yeah, that's important to conclude with. Ladies and gentlemen, please write in the comments what you think about this, and I'll see you next time. Like, share, and of course consider financially supporting this content, because thanks to that it can be more frequent, better, and of course with a better mood I can fully dedicate myself to it. Yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.